My husband handed me a first-class ticket to Paris for our 5th anniversary and kissed my forehead. An hour later, as I rolled my suitcase down the driveway, my neighbor grabbed my arm. She looked dead into my eyes and whispered to pretend I forgot my passport and go hide in my master bathroom for 15 minutes. I trusted her, and I did. What I heard through that bathroom door dismantled my entire marriage in less than 60 seconds. My name is Madeline. I am 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. I spend my life uncovering financial fraud, but I never expected to find the biggest con artist living inside my own home. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever trusted the wrong person and had to use your brain to get yourself out of a nightmare. It was a crisp Friday morning in our upscale Seattle suburb. David and I were standing in the grand foyer of the home my grandfather had left me. It was a stunning property worth over $1.5 million, fully paid off and legally mine before we ever got married. David was 35 and a vice president of sales at a mid-sized firm. He was always perfectly groomed, always charming, and always obsessed with how things looked from the outside. He handed me my sleek silver suitcase with a smile that could sell a freezing man a bag of ice. "Have an amazing weekend in Paris, Maddie," he said, smoothing down the collar of his expensive polo shirt. "You work so hard tracking down missing money for your clients. You deserve a break. Drink some wine for me." I smiled back, feeling a rush of affection. A surprise solo trip to France seemed like the ultimate romantic gesture for our 5-year anniversary. He said he had huge deals to close and could not join me, but he wanted me to be spoiled. I hugged him tight, completely unaware that his heart was racing not out of love, but out of pure criminal anticipation. I stepped out into the morning air and started walking down the long driveway toward the waiting town car. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of my suitcase wheels clicking against the pavement. That was when Nancy appeared. Nancy was a 60-year-old retired paralegal who lived next door. She missed nothing. She spent her days tending to her prize-winning roses and keeping a razor-sharp eye on everything that happened on our street. I waved at her, but she did not wave back. Instead, she walked briskly over to me, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. She pulled me close so the driver could not hear. "Do not get in that car," she whispered, her grip tightening. "Tell the driver you forgot your allergy medication and send him away. Walk around to your back door, sneak inside, and lock yourself in your master bathroom. Do not make a sound. Wait 15 minutes. I stared at her. My heart immediately started pounding against my ribs. "Nancy, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am going to miss my flight." Nancy squeezed my wrist harder, her eyes deadly serious. "Madeline, I worked in a law firm for 40 years. I know a setup when I see one. I just saw a very shady-looking van parked 2 streets over, and the people inside are waiting for you to leave. Go hide in your bathroom and you will understand everything." There was something so terrifyingly certain in her voice that my analytical brain took over. I let go of my suitcase and walked over to the driver. I handed him a $50 bill, apologized profusely, and told him I had a family emergency and had to cancel the ride. I watched his car disappear down the street before I picked up my bag and tiptoed around the side of the house. I used my hidden spare key to open the back patio door, wincing at every tiny squeak of the hinges. The house was completely silent. I left my suitcase in the laundry room, took off my heels, and crept upstairs in my bare feet. My forensic accountant instincts were screaming at me. I was trained to look for anomalies, and suddenly, my perfect morning felt entirely staged. I slipped into the master bathroom, stepping into the large walk-in shower and pulling the heavy frosted glass door shut. I sat down on the cold marble floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The darkness of the bathroom felt suffocating. I checked my watch. 10 minutes passed. My mind raced with terrible possibilities. Was he cheating? Was another woman about to walk into my bedroom? Then right at the 15-minute mark, the heavy oak front door downstairs slammed open. I held my breath. I heard loud footsteps echoing in the foyer, but it was not just David. There were multiple people walking inside, laughing and talking loudly. I pressed my ear against the cold wooden door of the bathroom. The acoustics in my house carried every sound from the grand foyer straight up the sweeping staircase. I recognized the sharp, shrill laugh of my mother-in-law, Brenda, immediately. Following close behind her was the heavy stomping of my sister-in-law, Rachel, and the booming voice of her husband, Jamal. Jamal was an arrogant tech bro who had burned through millions in investor capital for a startup that produced absolutely nothing. Mixed in was the deep, gravelly tone of a man I had never heard before. David spoke up, his voice echoing off the marble floors. "All right, everyone, keep it down," he said, sounding giddy. "She is on her way to the airport, but we do not want the neighbors getting suspicious. Grab a glass. I am opening the Bollinger." I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork, followed by the clinking of crystal flutes. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Why were my husband and his family drinking my vintage champagne at 9 in the morning? To David, Brenda announced, her voice dripping with pride. "Finally taking control of this marriage. I told you from the beginning that cold auditor was no good for you. She thinks she is so superior because her grandfather handed her this house. Well, today we take back what should belong to this family." I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop my gasp. Brenda had always hated me. She resented my career, my independence, and my refusal to fund Rachel's shopping addictions. But hearing her openly celebrate my absence in my own home felt like a physical blow. Rachel chimed in next, her voice whiny and entitled. "It is about time, David. Do you know how humiliating it is that my brother lives in a mansion while Jamal and I rent a condo? Plus, Jamal really needs this cash infusion by Monday. The investors are threatening to call the federal authorities." I closed my eyes. The financial pieces started snapping together in my mind. Jamal had been dodging fraud allegations for months. He lied about his prototypes and investors were demanding their money back immediately. "Relax, babe," Jamal said confidently. His footsteps paced across the hardwood floor. "Once this home equity line of credit clears on Monday, my company will be fully funded again. I will pay David back with interest when the next round of capital comes in. You just make sure this paperwork is bulletproof, Dave. I cannot afford delays." "Do not worry, Jamal," David replied, his tone slick. "That is exactly why I brought Greg here. Greg is a highly recommended public notary. Or at least he has the stamp of one." The unfamiliar, gravelly voice chuckled. "For $5,000 cash, I am whatever you want me to be, David. Just show me where the wife needs to sign, and I will stamp it official. But you better be absolutely sure she is not coming back. If the bank calls her to verify the loan, we are all going to federal prison." "She is not coming back," David laughed cruelly. "Her flight to Paris takes off in exactly 40 minutes. She will be over the Atlantic without cell service for the next 11 hours. And here is the best part. As soon as her plane is in the air, I am calling the credit card companies to report her cards stolen. I am freezing every joint account we have. She will land in France with no money, no return ticket, and no way to contact the bank before Monday morning." My blood ran ice cold. This was not just a betrayal. It was a highly coordinated financial assassination. My own husband was planning to strand me in a foreign country without a single dollar to my name, just so he could forge my signature and steal $800,000 against the equity of my house. He was willing to destroy my credit, my career, and my entire life to bail out his incompetent brother-in-law. "And then what happens when she finally gets back?" Rachel asked eagerly. "I will serve her with divorce papers the second she lands," David sneered. "I will tell the judge she abandoned the marriage and fled the country with another man. She will be so busy fighting the divorce she will not even notice the equity loan until the money is already washed through Jamal's company. Now hand me that pen. Let us make me a rich man today." I slowly pulled my cell phone out of my jacket pocket. My cold hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. I opened the voice memo app and carefully pressed the bright red record button. The red numbers on my screen began to tick upward, tracking every single word spoken in the foyer below. I held my breath, terrified that even the sound of my lungs expanding might give me away. Through the heavy floorboards, I could hear the rustling of thick paper. "All right, Dave, the notary," Greg grunted. I have the home equity line of credit documents right here. $800,000 secured against the property. The bank already pre-approved it based on the appraisal you submitted last month. All I need is her signature on the primary borrower line and yours as the secondary. Then I will hit it with my official seal. I heard the scratching of a pen. David was actually practicing my signature. Let me just get the loop on the M right, he muttered. She has this annoying way of signing her name like she is signing a presidential decree. Always so precise, always so perfect. God, I am sick of it. Take your time, Brenda advised, her voice soothing and entirely devoid of guilt. You are doing the right thing, David. A wife is supposed to support her family. If she refuses to help Jamal build his tech company, then you have to make the executive decision as the man of the house. That is what marriage is about. Shared resources. Shared resources. I squeezed my eyes shut as a single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. This house was not a shared resource. My grandfather worked his entire life in commercial real estate to buy this home. He left it to me in a bulletproof trust before he died. David and I signed a strict prenuptial agreement specifically to protect this asset. But a prenup meant nothing if my own husband was willing to commit federal mortgage fraud to bypass it. Looks good enough, Greg announced. Sign it here, and initial at the bottom. The sound of the pen gliding across the paper felt like a knife dragging across my skin. That was it. With a few strokes of blue ink, my husband was attempting to leverage my childhood home, my security, and my future to fund a fraudulent tech startup. Jamal clapped his hands together, echoing loudly in the hallway. Man, this is a lifesaver, he exclaimed. Those investors were breathing down my neck. They were ready to audit my company by Tuesday. When this $800,000 hits my business account on Monday morning, I can finally pay them their dividends and get them off my back. You are a real brother, Dave. Just make sure you pay the monthly interest on this loan, Jamal David warned, though his tone was light. If the bank does not get their payments, they will foreclose on the house. Not that I care if she loses it, but I do not want my credit ruined since my name is on the secondary line. Rachel scoffed loudly. Oh, please. Even if the house goes into foreclosure, who cares? It is too big for the two of you anyway. She can go live in a normal apartment like the rest of us. It is completely unfair that she gets to live in luxury just because her grandfather died. She did not earn this house. We actually need this money to survive. I wiped the tear from my face. The sadness was gone, completely vaporized by a sudden, blinding rage. My analytical mind kicked into high gear. They were so confident in their ignorance. Rachel thought they were just taking out a loan. She did not realize that wire fraud, identity theft, and forging a mortgage document were federal felonies carrying massive prison sentences. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how banking compliance departments operated. Every forged signature and electronic submission leaves a permanent digital footprint. They were handing me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy them all. There it is, Greg said. Stand back. A heavy mechanical thud echoed through the house, then another, and a third. It was the sound of the fake notary stamp hitting the pages, making the forged documents look perfectly legal. Done deal, Greg said, his voice thick with satisfaction. I will file these electronically with the county clerk through my backdoor portal. The bank will process the wire transfer first thing Monday morning. I need my $5,000 now. I have an envelope of cash right here, David replied. Thanks, Greg. You are a lifesaver. Now everyone drink up. I have a flight to track. The second her plane crosses the Atlantic, I am calling the fraud department at all our credit card companies. I am going to report her card stolen and freeze our joint checking account. I want her completely stranded when she lands in Paris. Let us see how smart and independent she feels when she is begging on the streets of France. The group erupted into cruel laughter. I stared at my phone screen. The recording was at exactly 14 minutes and 20 seconds. I carefully hit the stop button and saved the audio file to my secure cloud drive. I had heard enough. It was time for the forensic auditor to go to work. I had heard enough. It was time for the forensic auditor to go to work. But before I could even stand up, the voices downstairs shifted into an even darker territory. I pressed my ear against the door again, realizing that the depths of their cruelty had not yet been fully exposed. Jamal let out a heavy sigh that echoed up the stairs. Man, you have no idea how close I was to wearing an orange jumpsuit, he said, his voice dropping its previous bravado. The Securities and Exchange Commission sent a formal inquiry to my office on Wednesday. Those investors did not just complain, Dave. They hired a forensic accounting firm to audit my corporate books. If I do not have that $800,000 sitting in the company account by Monday morning, the feds are going to see that I used their seed money to buy my Tesla, rent my penthouse, and cover Rachel's endless shopping sprees. It is textbook wire fraud. They were going to indict me. Rachel chimed in, her tone devoid of any empathy. Well, it is not your fault the tech market is so slow right now, Jamal. You had to keep up appearances to attract funding. Madeline owes us this money anyway. She sits on her high horse, constantly looking down at us, like we are worthless peasants, just because she makes a ridiculous corporate salary. It is about time her precious house did some actual good for this family. Her twisted sense of entitlement was staggering. She was fully justifying federal embezzlement simply because she felt insecure about my career. And what exactly is your endgame with the divorce? David Brenda asked, her heels clicking against the marble floor. You cannot just lock her out. She is a stubborn woman. She will fight you tooth and nail when she gets back from France. David laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made my skin crawl. That is the beauty of it, Mom. I am not just locking her out. I am filing an emergency ex parte order on Monday morning. I have already drafted the affidavit. I am telling the judge that she has been exhibiting erratic behavior, emptying our joint accounts and fleeing the country. By the time she figures out her credit cards are canceled mid-flight, she will land at Charles de Gaulle with €0 and a deactivated phone. I am cutting off her cellular data plan right after takeoff. Brenda gasped. Oh, David, that is truly brilliant. But how will she get home? She will not, David replied smoothly. She will have to beg the embassy for a loan which takes days to process. Meanwhile, she misses work on Monday and Tuesday, giving me grounds to contact her firm and tell them she has suffered a mental breakdown. By the time she finally drags herself back to Seattle, she will be unemployed, locked out of her own home, and facing an at-fault divorce. And because she abandoned the marital home under suspicious circumstances, my lawyer says I can petition for spousal support. A sick feeling washed over me. He did not just want to steal my equity. He wanted to destroy my professional reputation, my livelihood, and my sanity. He had weaponized my anniversary trip to execute a perfect financial murder. The level of premeditation was chilling. He had thought of every angle, every vulnerability, and every way to inflict maximum damage. Well, I say good riddance, Rachel announced, her voice echoing with malice. Maybe being homeless in Paris will teach her some humility. Now pour me another glass of that champagne. We should toast to your new bachelor life, Dave. Hear, hear, Jamal agreed. To David the mastermind, and to my tech startup. Monday morning, we are all going to be rich. Glasses clinked again. I sat on the bathroom floor, pulling my knees tight to my chest. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that I did not even feel the urge to cry anymore. The tears had completely dried up, leaving behind a cold, hardened resolve. They were drinking my champagne, celebrating my engineered destruction, and banking on the assumption that I was a weak, helpless woman who would simply panic and collapse when her credit cards declined in a foreign country. They had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot what I do for a living. I dissect complex financial crimes, track hidden assets, and tear apart fraudulent spreadsheets. I was not a victim waiting to be slaughtered. I was the apex predator. All right, everyone, drink up and clear out, David commanded. I need to get to the bank to drop off the initial processing fee, and then I have a phone call to make to Visa and MasterCard. Let us go. The heavy oak door slammed shut, echoing with a finality that shook the floorboards beneath me. I waited another 60 seconds, listening to the engine of Rachel's SUV roar to life and fade down the street. The house fell into a sickeningly quiet stillness. I was alone, but I could not stay here. David could realize he forgot something and turn back. I had to vanish. The master bathroom had a large frosted window that opened out onto the sloping roof of the sunroom. From there, it was a short drop to the backyard trellis. I grabbed my carry-on bag, which held my work laptop and my emergency cash. I pushed the window up, wincing at the metallic scrape of the track. The cool Seattle morning air hit my face as I squeezed through the frame. I slid down the gentle slope of the roof, the shingles scraping my bare feet. I had left my shoes downstairs in the laundry room to avoid making noise. I grasped the wooden lattice of the trellis and climbed down as quickly as I could, dropping the last few feet onto the damp grass of my backyard. I sprinted across the lawn toward the wooden gate that opened into the back alley. As soon as I unlatched it, I saw her. Nancy was sitting in her silver sedan, the engine idling quietly. She rolled down the passenger window, her sharp eyes scanning my face. "Get in," she commanded. I threw my bag into the footwell and climbed into the passenger seat, locking the door behind me. I was panting, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Nancy put the car in drive and pulled away from my house, steering us through the maze of suburban streets. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Madeline," she said, keeping her eyes on the road. "I did not see a ghost, Nancy," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I saw a firing squad, and my husband was holding the rifle." I told her absolutely everything. I explained the fake notary, the forged mortgage documents, Jamal's federal fraud investigation, and David's plan to cancel my credit cards while I was mid-flight. Nancy gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. "That absolute monster," she hissed. "I am taking you straight to the police station." "No," I said sharply. Nancy slammed on the brakes, pulling the car over to the curb. She stared at me in complete disbelief. "What do you mean, no, Madeline? They are stealing your home. If we go to the police right now, David will just say it was a misunderstanding or a very bad joke." I explained, my analytical brain fully taking the wheel. "He will destroy the forged documents and Jamal will find another way to cover his tracks. They will know I am on to them. I cannot just stop the fraud, Nancy. I have to let them commit it. I have to let them dig the hole so deep that they can never climb out." Nancy stared at me for a long moment before a slow, approving smile spread across her face. "Where to, then?" she asked. "Not the airport," I replied. "I need an untraceable place to work. Take me to that extended stay motel on the edge of the city, the one that accepts cash." 30 minutes later, Nancy dropped me off at a dingy motel off the interstate. I hugged her, thanked her for saving my life, and promised I would call her when it was over. I walked into the lobby and paid for 3 nights using the emergency cash I always kept in my travel bag. The clerk handed me a physical key and did not even ask for my ID. Room number 12 was small, smelling faintly of stale smoke and bleach, but it had a desk and a working internet connection. That was all I needed. I locked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy blackout curtains shut. I sat down at the chipped wooden desk and opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh blue light over my face. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cheap motel air, and exhaled every ounce of weakness I had left. The heartbroken wife who stood in the foyer an hour ago was dead. In her place was a senior forensic auditor with a decade of experience tearing apart white-collar criminals. I cracked my knuckles and opened my encrypted banking portal. David thought he could outsmart me with a fake notary and a canceled credit card. He completely forgot that I built my entire career hunting down arrogant men exactly like him. It was finally time to follow the money and expose their lies. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard consumer login page of our bank and routing directly through the secure access portal I used for my corporate investigations. David always thought he was a mastermind, but his cybersecurity hygiene was laughable. He used the same variation of our wedding anniversary for every single password. It took me less than 3 minutes to breach his personal email, his private cloud storage, and the administrative backend of our joint financial portfolio. The motel room's Wi-Fi was painfully slow, but my custom decryption software was highly efficient. I started with the primary checking account. There it was. Sitting right at the top of the pending transactions list was an incoming wire transfer labeled as a home equity disbursement. $800,000. The status indicator was a blinking yellow circle waiting for the next business day to clear. I clicked on the attached documentation. A PDF of the forged mortgage agreement popped onto my screen, complete with my perfectly copied signature and the fraudulent notary stamp Greg had applied just hours ago. I immediately downloaded the file, saving it to 3 separate encrypted drives. This piece of paper alone was enough to send them both to federal prison for a minimum of 10 years. But as a forensic auditor, I knew that large-scale fraud was rarely an isolated incident. Criminals like David and Jamal do not just wake up one morning and decide to steal nearly $1 million. They build up to it. They start small, testing the waters, seeing what they can get away with before they make their massive final strike. I needed to see the entire financial picture. I needed to know exactly how long I had been sleeping next to a parasite. I navigated away from the checking account and opened the portal for our joint investment and retirement portfolio. We had set up this account 5 years ago, right after we got married. Every month, a significant portion of my 6-figure salary was automatically deposited into this fund. Based on my compounding interest calculations, the balance should have been sitting comfortably around $450,000. We were supposed to use that money to build a custom cabin in the mountains and retire early. That was the dream David and I mapped out on our honeymoon. When the dashboard finally loaded, the number staring back at me felt like a physical punch to the throat. $42,000. I blinked, staring at the screen as if the pixels might magically rearrange themselves. But the numbers did not change. Over $400,000 had completely vanished. The air in the motel room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I pressed my palms against my eyes, taking a deep breath to force down the rising panic. I could not afford to lose my composure. I grabbed my mouse and clicked on the transaction history, expanding the timeline to cover the last 24 months. The screen flooded with red text indicating outbound transfers. A sickening pattern immediately emerged. Every single month for the past 2 years, there had been systematic withdrawals. David had not taken it all at once to avoid triggering automated fraud alerts. Instead, he had been bleeding the account dry piece by piece. He was pulling out $10,000 here, $15,000 there. To bypass the early withdrawal restrictions, he had submitted dozens of fraudulent hardship applications. He claimed we were facing severe medical emergencies, expensive home repairs, and catastrophic debt. He even forged my signature on spousal consent forms, allowing him to take massive loans against our retirement plan. He was so desperate for cash that he was happily paying the heavy federal tax penalties for early withdrawal just to get his hands on the liquid assets. I exported the entire transaction ledger into a master spreadsheet and ran a quick macro to tally the total losses. He had siphoned away exactly $412,000. My retirement, the future I had worked 70-hour weeks to secure, was completely gone. The level of deceit was almost impossible to process. This was not a sudden act of desperation to save Jamal's failing company. This was a sustained, calculated campaign of financial abuse. While I was traveling across the country auditing corrupt corporations, my own husband was sitting in my living room, quietly transferring my life savings into his personal checking account. He smiled at me over dinner, kissed me goodnight, and then logged online to steal my future. I leaned back in the creaky wooden chair of the motel room, the harsh blue light of the screen reflecting in my cold eyes. The initial shock was rapidly solidifying into absolute zero rage. I had the dates and the exact amounts of the stolen retirement funds safely documented. Now I just needed to prove exactly where all that missing money went. I pulled up his external bank routing numbers, ready to follow the long paper trail. The digital breadcrumbs led me straight into a labyrinth of secondary checking accounts and hidden credit cards. David had set up an entire shadow economy operating just beneath the surface of our marriage. I clicked on a routing number that had received over $150,000 in staggered transfers over the past 18 months. The account was registered at a local credit union under David's name, but the debit card was assigned to someone else entirely, Rachel. My blood pressure spiked, but my hands remained perfectly steady on the keyboard. I opened a new browser tab and pulled up Rachel's public social media page. I split my screen, placing her timeline of glamorous photos right next to the bank statements. The forensic puzzle pieces began snapping together with sickening precision. On March 12th, David transferred $14,000 into the shadow account. On March 14th, Rachel posted a photo of herself holding a brand new orange Hermes Birkin bag, sitting at a high-end cafe. Her caption read "blessed" and "highly favored" with a sparkling emoji. I checked the bank statement again. There was a matching $14,000 charge at the Hermes boutique in downtown Seattle on March 13th. She had not been blessed. She had been funded by my stolen retirement. I kept scrolling down the list, aggressively matching dates and amounts. $7,000 transferred in May correlated perfectly with her luxury vacation to Cabo San Lucas. $5,000 in July covered her custom diamond tennis bracelet. Every time Rachel strutted into family dinners flaunting her latest designer purchase and making snide remarks about my boring corporate wardrobe, she was literally wearing my life savings. She was wearing the mountain cabin David and I were supposed to build. The financial autopsy did not stop with Rachel. I dug deeper into the ledger and traced another recurring outbound wire of $1,500 a month. It was an auto-pay setup going directly to Tesla Financial Services. I cross-referenced the account number and hacked into the payment portal to find the lease agreement. The car was registered to Jamal. This was the exact same matte black Model S he drove to our house every Sunday for family dinners. It was the same car he leaned against in our driveway while giving me unsolicited advice about how to take risks and be an entrepreneur instead of a mindless corporate drone. He had boldly boasted to everyone that his startup was doing so incredibly well, he paid for the luxury vehicle in pure cash. In reality, my husband was quietly bleeding our joint retirement assets to cover the expensive lease, just to keep up the pathetic illusion of Jamal's success. They were actively using me as their personal automated teller machine, while treating me like an uninvited guest in my own home. But the absolute most devastating discovery of the night was not the staggering amount of stolen money itself. It was the transaction notes attached to the smaller digital payments. David had used a popular mobile payment application to send Rachel smaller increments of cash for her daily expenses and beauty treatments. The application required a memo line for each and every transfer. Reading those short memos made my stomach turn into a tight knot. One note attached to a $2,000 payment read, "Hush money, so you do not tell her." Another for $500 simply said, "A withdrawal from the ATM." A third payment for $800 read, "Buying your silence about the blonde." That last memo made my fingers freeze over the keyboard. The blonde. My husband was not just stealing from me to desperately fund his parasitic family. He was actively paying them off to cover up an ongoing affair. The entire family knew exactly what he was doing behind my back. Brenda, Rachel, and Jamal all knew, and they all gladly accepted my stolen money as the monthly price of their silence. They laughed at me while I worked 70-hour weeks to build our future. I remembered Brenda criticizing my long hours, telling me a good wife should be home more to satisfy her husband. All the while she knew he was spending my money on his mistress. I slowly closed the spreadsheet and stared blankly at the peeling wallpaper of the motel room. The hot, blinding anger I had felt earlier was completely gone. It was replaced by a terrifying, absolute clarity that froze my veins. They had taken my money, my trust, my marriage, and my dignity. They thought I was a naive fool who would just cry and surrender. Now I was going to aggressively take back control and permanently destroy every single thing they had left in their pathetic, miserable lives. But to execute a flawless financial takedown, I needed time. The most critical rule of an audit is to never alert the target before you have secured the perimeter. If I marched into the police station right now, or if I froze the bank accounts immediately, David would receive an automated text alert. He would panic. He would instantly destroy the forged documents, and Jamal would deny everything. They would claim it was a misunderstanding or a draft error. I needed them to feel completely safe. I needed them to believe their malicious plan was working perfectly, so they would willingly walk right into the federal trap I was building. To do that, I had to convince my husband that I was exactly where he wanted me to be, stranded in France. I checked my watch. It was early afternoon in Seattle, which meant my supposed flight to Paris would be landing soon. I pulled my secondary burner laptop from my bag. As an auditor dealing with sensitive international corporate espionage, I always carried a heavily encrypted device equipped with military-grade virtual private network software. I booted it up and routed my IP address through a secure server located in central Paris. If David or Jamal's tech friends tried to trace the origin of my message, it would bounce back to a French cellular tower. Next, I needed visual proof. I opened my personal photo archives and found a picture I had taken 2 years ago during a corporate layover at Charles de Gaulle Airport. It was a simple shot of a coffee cup next to a croissant with the distinct terminal architecture in the background. My face was not in it, but my signature gold watch was visible resting on the table. It was perfect. I opened my photo editing software and carefully stripped the original metadata from the image file. I manually rewrote the exchangeable image file format data, embedding today's date and the exact current time in Paris. I even adjusted the digital noise and lighting levels slightly so the image compression would look completely natural when transmitted over a cellular network. I transferred the scrubbed and backdated photo to my cell phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened my text message thread with David. The last message he had sent me was from this morning. "Have a safe flight, honey. I love you so much." The sheer hypocrisy of those words staring back at me on the screen made me want to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I attached the doctored photo of the French terminal. Underneath the image, I typed a short and sweet message. Arrived safely. The flight was long, but the coffee here is already making up for it. I love you. I hovered my thumb over the send button. This was the point of no return. The moment this message delivered, the countdown to their destruction officially began. I pressed send. A small blue checkmark appeared indicating the message was delivered. A few seconds later, the indicator changed to show that David had read it. I could picture him sitting in our house, or perhaps at a fancy restaurant with his family laughing at his phone. He probably showed the picture to Brenda and Rachel, gloating about how oblivious I was. He was likely dialing the credit card companies at this exact moment, acting like a concerned husband reporting his wife's card stolen to freeze my accounts. He was falling right into the snare. I did not wait for his reply. I immediately held down the power button on my cell phone and watched the screen go entirely black. I popped the protective case off, removed the SIM card, and snapped the small piece of plastic in half. I tossed the broken pieces into the motel trash can. I was now officially off the grid. As far as David knew, his plan was a total success. He would assume my phone died or that my cellular data was successfully deactivated by his calls to the provider. He would spend the rest of the weekend celebrating his massive payday, unaware that he was dancing on a financial landmine. I turned my attention back to my glowing laptop screen. The decoy was now set. The targets were completely comfortable and unaware. Now I had exactly 48 hours to build the federal case that would end their freedom. I needed to draft legal holds, contact my senior real estate attorney, and carefully prepare a comprehensive evidence dossier for the Internal Revenue Service Fraud Division investigators. I cracked my knuckles and opened a blank encrypted document. The long weekend had just begun. I was going to deeply enjoy every single second of tearing their stolen fake empire down to the ground. I spent the next 2 hours organizing the exported banking ledgers, the downloaded loan application, and the audio file of their conversation. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced and filed with the precision of a federal audit. I needed to build a cage so tight that neither my husband nor his brother-in-law could escape. I dialed my real estate attorney, Benjamin. He had handled the transfer of my grandfather's property years ago and drafted the ironclad prenuptial agreement David signed. He answered immediately. "Someone just forged my signature on an $800,000 equity line against my Seattle property using a fake notary," I said. They submitted the paperwork electronically to the lender this morning. Madeline, that is a massive federal offense, Benjamin said. I am filing a fraud alert with the county clerk right now. We will contact the bank and freeze the application before underwriting looks at it. No, do not block the application, Benjamin, I commanded. I want the bank to approve it. If that loan originates, the bank places a lien on your property. You could lose the house. I reviewed the digital application David submitted, I explained. He forged my signature as the primary borrower, but listed himself as the secondary guarantor, using his own social security number to push the approval through. If we freeze the application, the bank rejects it, and David walks away. But if we let the loan originate, and then report the primary signature as a proven forgery, the bank will invalidate my liability. Because David's signature is legitimate and tied to his personal social security number, the bank will hold him entirely responsible for the fraudulent debt, Benjamin realized. He will owe them $800,000. Exactly. I will send you the audio recording of the forgery taking place. Draft the fraud affidavits, but do not submit them to the bank's legal department until Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Let the loan process over the weekend. Let David hang himself. The first trap was set. Now I needed to handle Jamal and his failing tech startup. I dialed my contact at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Special Agent Carter and I had worked together on several high-profile corporate embezzlement cases. She knew my strict reputation for delivering absolute bulletproof evidence. Carter speaking, she answered. It is Madeline, I said. I have a wire fraud and money laundering case for you, but it is highly personal. My brother-in-law is attempting to use an $800,000 fraudulent mortgage loan to cover up missing investor capital in his tech startup. The wire transfer is scheduled to hit his corporate business account first thing Monday morning. Agent Carter did not ask questions about my well-being. She knew I only cared about the hard numbers. Send me the routing information and the evidence of the original investor fraud, she instructed. I can have a federal magistrate issue a freeze order on his corporate accounts right now. I sent her the encrypted files. I need a massive favor, Carter, I said. Do not block the incoming wire transfer from the bank. Let the money leave the mortgage lender and hit his startup account. I want the deposit to register on his official ledger. But I need you to place a hard federal lock on his outbound transfers. He cannot be allowed to withdraw a single cent. So you want him to see the money arrive, but he cannot touch it, Carter clarified. I want him to stand in front of his angry investors on Monday morning thinking he has the cash to pay them off, I replied. I want him to log into his portal and find out his entire company has been seized by the federal government for money laundering. Consider it done, Madeline Carter said. The trap will spring the second that wire clears. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. The architecture of their ruin was now fully in place. David was legally bound to a massive fraudulent debt that would destroy his credit and send him to prison. Jamal was about to have his company seized by the IRS, leaving him totally exposed to the investors he had stolen from. The $800,000 would be safely locked in federal escrow, completely untouchable. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Back in Seattle, David was celebrating his flawless plan to strand me in Paris. He thought he was a mastermind who had finally outsmarted his rigid, calculating wife. He had no idea the trap had already closed around his ankles. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself to rest. Monday was going to be a spectacular day. I woke up late on Saturday morning feeling refreshed despite the lumpy motel mattress. The profound clarity of knowing exactly what I had to do wiped away any lingering exhaustion. I spent daylight hours organizing digital files into secure folders, categorizing evidence by federal statute violations. By the time the sun dipped below the highway horizon, casting neon motel signs into my room, it was Saturday night. I made a cup of cheap instant coffee and booted up the burner laptop to check my secure email server. If my husband followed his predictable narcissistic playbook, he would not be able to resist taking a victory lap. I was right. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a lengthy email from David sent just an hour ago with the subject line, "Official Notice of Separation." I clicked open the message, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. The sheer audacity of his words was staggering. He carefully crafted the email not just to hurt me, but to leave a documented paper trail portraying himself as the devastated, innocent victim. Madeline. The email began. I cannot believe I am writing this, but your erratic, deceitful behavior has left me no choice. When I called the credit card companies today to check on a suspicious charge, they informed me your cards were flagged for international fraud. I was worried sick until a mutual friend told me they saw you boarding that flight to Paris with another man. To think I bought you that ticket for our anniversary only for you to use it to run away with your lover, it is absolutely disgusting. I laughed out loud at the screen. The mutual friend was a complete fabrication. He was establishing a fake narrative to justify why he froze all my financial lifelines. He was preemptively building his defense for the divorce courts, painting me as an adulterous wife, abandoning the marital home. The email continued, plunging deeper into his delusion. Because you chose to abandon our marriage and drain our joint accounts to fund your secret life, I instructed my attorney to file for an immediate at-fault divorce on Monday morning. I am also filing an emergency motion for exclusive use of the marital residence. Do not attempt to return to the house. The locks have already been changed. David wrote, his arrogance bleeding through the digital text. I boxed up your personal items and left them in the garage. Since the house requires extensive upkeep that you are no longer contributing to, I am taking full control of the property management. My mother and sister will be moving in temporarily to help me maintain the estate during this difficult transition. You are hereby officially notified to vacate the premises. If you step foot on my property, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Have a nice life in France. I hope he was worth it. My property. The estate. He was talking about the house my grandfather built. The house legally protected entirely under my name. David convinced himself the forged loan magically transferred ownership to him. He was already moving his toxic mother and entitled sister into my home, assuming I was sitting on a Parisian curb, crying over declined credit cards. The gaslighting was a masterpiece of narcissistic projection. He accused me of draining joint accounts when I had the exact banking ledgers proving he stole every single penny to fund his family. He accused me of infidelity to cover up his own blonde mistress. I felt a deep, profound satisfaction reading his vicious words. David thought he was writing a legal threat. In reality, he just handed me a signed, written confession of his malicious intent. This email proved premeditation. It proved he purposefully froze my assets and intended to illegally evict the rightful homeowner using a fabricated story. I exported the email as a PDF document and dragged it directly into a folder labeled Divorce Proceedings Exhibit A. I forwarded a copy to my real estate attorney Benjamin with a short note attached. Look at what the mastermind sent me. Benjamin replied 3 minutes later with a single sentence. He is digging his own grave. I slowly closed the email client and leaned back against the chair, listening to the hum of the cheap motel refrigerator. David threw his absolute worst at me. He deployed every toxic tactic his family taught him. He lied, manipulated, projected, and stolen. But a forensic auditor does not ever argue with a pathological liar. A forensic auditor simply presents the receipts. Tomorrow was Sunday, and the villains were going to throw themselves a massive celebration. I needed to get some rest because I had a very important outfit to steam and a devastating script to finalize. I woke up early on Sunday morning to the sound of rain tapping against the motel window. The dreary Seattle weather matched the grim reality of my situation, but my mind was sharper than ever. I plugged my secondary laptop into the wall outlet and logged into my cellular provider's web portal. I had destroyed my physical phone, but my voicemail messages were automatically synced to the cloud. I wanted to see if anyone else in the family had decided to leave a digital footprint of their betrayal. There was a single new voicemail waiting in my inbox. It was from Brenda. The timestamp showed she had called me late Saturday night, probably after a few glasses of my vintage wine. I clicked play and leaned back, letting the audio fill the quiet room. Hello, Madeline. Brenda's voice slurred slightly, her tone dripping with venomous satisfaction. David told me you are stuck in Paris with no money. Honestly, I think it is the best thing that could have happened to you. Maybe begging on the streets will finally teach you some respect for the family you married into. I listened as her malicious laughter echoed through the laptop speakers. She sounded so triumphant, so utterly convinced that I was defeated. She was sitting in my living room drinking my liquor and celebrating my demise. You always thought you were better than us. Brenda continued, her words slurring together. You and your high-paying job and your perfect little spreadsheets. You are nothing but a soulless calculator, Madeline. You have no warmth, no heart, and no concept of loyalty. A real wife would have gladly handed over her assets to help her brother-in-law succeed, but you were too selfish. So David had to take matters into his own hands. And I am so proud of him for finally putting you in your place. My jaw tightened, but I did not stop the recording. I needed her to keep talking. I needed her to hang herself with her own words. This was the true face of the woman I had tried so hard to please for 5 years. We never liked you, Brenda confessed, her voice lowering into a cruel whisper. From the day David brought you home, I knew you were wrong for him. You were too independent, too stubborn. I told him to find a woman who understood her place, but he wanted the girl with the rich grandfather. Well, now, we have the house, the money, and the freedom. Do us all a favor and stay in Europe. If you come back here, we will make your life a living hell. Goodbye, Madeline. Enjoy the French pavement. The recording clicked off, leaving the motel room in total silence. I sat there for a long moment, letting the sheer toxicity of her words wash over me. Brenda had not just called to insult me. She had called to claim victory. She had officially admitted on a recorded line that she knew David took matters into his own hands regarding my assets. She knew about the fraudulent loan and she actively encouraged it, in the eyes of the law that made her a co-conspirator to federal wire fraud. I felt a cold smile stretch across my face. They were making this entirely too easy. Every time they opened their mouths, they handed me another piece of admissible evidence. I downloaded the audio file and ran it through a quick enhancement software to isolate the background noise. Behind Brenda's slurred insults, I could hear the faint sound of Rachel and Jamal laughing in my kitchen. They were all there celebrating their grand heist. I saved the enhanced audio file into a new folder labeled Co-Conspirator Confessions. I backed it up to 3 separate encrypted drives and emailed a copy directly to Agent Carter at the Internal Revenue Service. I added a brief note explaining that the target's mother had just confessed to prior knowledge of the financial crimes. Carter would have a field day adding conspiracy charges to their impending indictments. Brenda was going to learn exactly how warm a soulless calculator could be when tallying up federal prison sentences. With the digital evidence fully secured, I turned my attention to the physical preparations. I needed hard copies of everything for the grand finale. I drove to a 24-hour print shop 2 towns over, paying in cash to use their secure business center. I printed the forged mortgage application, the bank transfer logs, the timeline of David's retirement thefts, the Hermes receipts, the Tesla lease agreement, and the screenshots of Rachel's social media posts. I organized the documents into sleek black leather binders, creating a comprehensive portfolio of their destruction. Each binder was labeled with the names of the guilty parties. I printed extra copies for the local police, for the federal agents, and for the investors Jamal was planning to lie to tomorrow morning. By the time I returned to the motel room, it was late Sunday afternoon. My trap was fully loaded and the safety was officially off. I hung my sharpest navy blue power suit on the closet door and carefully steamed out every single wrinkle. I wanted them to see exactly who they had underestimated. Tomorrow I was not just going to confront them. I was going to financially execute them in front of an audience. Sunday afternoon arrived with a break in the rain, the weak Seattle sun managing to pierce through the gray clouds. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, surrounded by my neatly organized black binders. My trap was fully set, but I needed to keep a close eye on my targets. I opened my burner laptop and created a fake social media profile to monitor their public activity. Rachel was notoriously addicted to validation, and Jamal could never resist an opportunity to brag. I knew they would not be able to stay quiet about their impending payday. I scrolled through Rachel's public feed and immediately found what I was looking for. She had started a live video broadcast from what appeared to be the patio of the Commodore, one of the most exclusive and expensive seafood restaurants in the city. A single lunch there cost more than most people made in a week. I clicked on the live feed, muting the volume so I could watch without alerting the motel clerk down the hall. Rachel was wearing a white silk blouse that I immediately recognized. I had bought it for myself 2 months ago, but it had mysteriously disappeared from my closet. Now, she was parading it in front of her online followers, sipping a vibrant pink cocktail. Her perfect blonde hair was styled in loose waves, and she looked entirely unburdened by the fact that she was actively participating in a massive federal crime. "Look who finally decided to treat his wife," she squealed into the camera, panning the phone to show Jamal sitting across from her. Jamal was leaning back in his chair wearing a designer watch and a smug expression. He waved at the camera, his teeth bright against his dark skin. "When you grind as hard as I do, baby, you get to reap the rewards," he said loudly, making sure the people at the tables next to them could hear. I turned the volume up slightly, my professional curiosity getting the better of me. I wanted to hear exactly how he was spinning his fraudulent bailout. Jamal took the phone from Rachel, turning the camera to focus solely on himself. "To all my followers out there grinding in the tech space, listen up," he announced, his voice booming with fake authority. "I know the rumors have been swirling. I know the haters have been saying my startup was going under. But I am here to tell you that true visionaries never quit. As of this weekend, I have officially secured a massive angel investment to fully fund the next phase of our development." He paused, taking a slow, dramatic sip of his drink. He was putting on a performance, playing the role of the misunderstood genius who had finally triumphed. $800,000, he bragged, the number echoing through the restaurant. "That is what belief looks like. We are fully capitalized. So to all the doubters and to the investors who lacked faith, watch what happens next. Tomorrow morning we are hosting an exclusive press conference and launch party to celebrate this new capital injection. It is going to be epic." I watched the screen, my expression completely blank. He was actually going to hold a press conference. He was going to stand up in front of the local media, his peers, and his angry original investors to publicly claim the stolen money as legitimate venture capital. He was wrapping a bow around his own indictment. Rachel leaned into the frame, resting her chin on Jamal's shoulder. "We are just so blessed," she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "And to anyone out there who ever doubted us or tried to hold us back, well, karma is a funny thing. Sometimes the people who refuse to help you end up losing everything they have." The audacity was breathtaking. She was directly referencing me gloating about the fact that I was allegedly broke and stranded in Paris while she drank cocktails funded by my stolen retirement. They truly believed they were untouchable. They thought the $800,000 was already theirs, safely moving through the banking system to Jamal's corporate account. I took a screenshot of the video feed, making sure to capture the timestamp and Jamal's face as he bragged about the specific amount of the loan. This was more than just a narcissistic display. It was a public admission of receiving the exact amount of the fraudulent transfer. I saved the image and emailed it directly to Special Agent Carter with the subject line, "The suspect is currently boasting about the stolen funds on a public live stream. He plans to host a press conference tomorrow morning to announce the capital." Carter replied less than 2 minutes later. "Perfect timing, Madeline. The federal freeze order on his corporate account was just finalized by the magistrate. The wire transfer will hit his ledger at 9 a.m. tomorrow, but the outbound lock is impenetrable. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee with that money. Let him throw his party. We will be there to celebrate with him." I closed the laptop, shutting off Rachel's obnoxious laughter. The pieces were moving exactly as I had calculated. Tomorrow morning, Jamal's grand illusion would shatter in the most spectacular and public way possible, and I was going to have a front row seat. I kept my eyes glued to the screen as the live broadcast continued. Jamal adjusted the collar of his expensive linen shirt and leaned closer to the camera lens. His face was flushed with the expensive alcohol, and the intoxicating high of his own perceived brilliance. I want to send a very special shout-out to my early seed investors. He sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. You guys know who you are, the ones who sent those nasty legal threat letters last week. The ones who tried to bring federal auditors into my office because you lacked the vision to see the bigger picture. Well, I am extending a personal invitation to every single one of you, Jamal declared, spreading his arms wide. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, we are hosting a massive launch event at the Grand Azure Hotel downtown. I have rented out the entire main ballroom. We will have catered breakfast, premium champagne, and a live presentation of our next quarter deliverables. But most importantly, I am going to pull up my corporate banking dashboard on the main projector screen. I am going to show all of you doubters the fresh $800,000 capital injection sitting right there in my operating account. You will see with your own eyes that my empire is bulletproof. The sheer hubris of his promise was almost difficult to comprehend. He was not just lying to his investors to buy time. He was actively inviting them to a public spectacle where he intended to use my stolen home equity to humiliate them. He was so incredibly confident in David's forged mortgage application that he was willing to bet his entire public reputation on that bank transfer clearing by morning. Rachel grabbed the phone again, flipping the camera back to herself. She took another long sip of her pink cocktail and smiled radiantly. We cannot wait to see all of you there, she purred. It is going to be such a beautiful morning. And to my amazing husband Jamal, I am just so incredibly proud of you. You never let the small-minded people drag you down. You always knew you were destined for greatness. Suddenly, a third figure stepped into the frame of the video. It was Brenda. She had apparently joined them for their celebratory lunch. She leaned down and kissed Jamal's cheek, beaming with maternal pride. That is right, Rachel, Brenda announced loudly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant patio. We always knew Jamal was a genius. It just took a little bit of family teamwork to get him the resources he deserved. And let us give a massive round of applause to my brilliant son David, who could not be here right now because he is busy handling some very important real estate management back at the house. He really stepped up and fixed the dead weight dragging this family down. They all clinked their glasses together in a sickening display of unity. They were a family of vultures gorging themselves on a carcass they had not even killed yet. Brenda was openly praising David for orchestrating the fraud, completely oblivious to the fact that her public endorsement was actively cementing their criminal conspiracy charges. They were literally live-streaming their own prosecution exhibits. I reached out and finally closed the browser window, shutting off the broadcast. The motel room plunged back into silence. My heart rate was slow and steady. I did not feel a single trace of anger anymore. Anger was an emotional response to injustice, and I was no longer a victim of injustice. I was the architect of their impending doom. Their arrogance had reached its absolute peak, and they had climbed so high that the fall was going to completely shatter them. I spent the rest of the Sunday evening doing a final review of my presentation materials. I organized the printed screenshots of Jamal's live broadcast, slipping them into the final section of my black leather binders. I logged into my secure portal one last time to verify the status of the banking network. The transaction was queued for Monday morning. The federal hold requested by Special Agent Carter was locked in place. The money would appear on the ledger, but the account itself was frozen solid in a federal escrow vault. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. I carefully laid out my navy blue power suit, my crisp white blouse, and my black leather pumps. I packed my laptop and the heavy binders into my leather briefcase. Everything was perfectly aligned. I crawled into the cheap motel bed, pulled the scratchy blankets up to my chin, and closed my eyes. I slept deeply, dreaming of the financial execution I would deliver. But my internal clock woke me up at exactly 2 in the morning. The federal banking system is a massive digital organism, and its core transaction servers reset their daily processing queues at 2:15 Standard Time. This was the exact window I needed to finalize the ultimate financial kill switch. I sat up in the dark motel room, kicked off the scratchy blankets, and opened my burner laptop one last time. The screen illuminated the shadows, casting a harsh blue glow across the black leather binders stacked on the desk. I routed my connection through the secure virtual private network and accessed the mortgage lender's administrative portal. I had a backdoor access code provided by my forensic accounting firm for auditing purposes. I navigated to the pending transactions queue and found the $800,000 home equity line of credit. The status indicator had shifted from pending to processing. The funds were actively moving out of the lender's reserve and entering the federal wire system. Now, I had to ensure the liability landed squarely on my husband's neck. When David forged my signature, he made a catastrophic structural error. He listed me as the primary borrower to leverage the equity of my house, but the bank required a secondary guarantor because the loan amount was so massive. To force the approval through the automated underwriting system, David had provided his own social security number and his own personal credit profile as the secondary backer. He assumed that once the money was safely washed through Jamal's tech startup, the secondary liability would never matter. He thought he was playing the system, but he was actually wrapping a titanium noose around his own financial throat. I deployed a specialized legal hold code into the bank's fraud detection algorithm. I specifically flagged the primary borrower's signature as under active federal dispute. By implementing this exact code, I triggered a very specific banking protocol. When a primary signature is contested for felony forgery, the lender immediately isolates the collateral, which was my house, and shifts the entire debt burden directly to the verified secondary guarantor. The system processed my command in milliseconds. I watched the digital ledger update in real time. The $800,000 debt was permanently severed from my property deed and legally bolted to David's social security number. He was now solely responsible for nearly $1 million in fraudulent debt, and the bank would demand immediate repayment the second the forgery was officially confirmed. The first half of the kill switch was locked. Now I needed to secure the cash. I switched tabs and opened the tracking portal for Jamal's corporate receiving account. Special Agent Carter had already done her part by securing the federal magistrate order, but I needed to verify the exact status of the incoming wire. The money was scheduled to hit Jamal's ledger at 9 in the morning, exactly when his press conference began. I reviewed the code structure of the federal freeze. It was a masterpiece of financial trap-laying. When the wire transfer arrived, the bank would accept the deposit and reflect the new balance on Jamal's user dashboard. If he logged into his mobile application, it would proudly display a balance of $800,000. But the actual liquidity was entirely quarantined in a hidden federal escrow vault. It was a phantom balance. If Jamal attempted to wire a single dollar to his angry investors or swipe his corporate debit card for a cup of coffee, the transaction would trigger a hard decline and an immediate locked account notification citing federal money laundering statutes. He was going to stand on a stage in front of the local media, his peers, and his furious seed investors to brag about wealth he could not even touch. He was going to pull up his dashboard to prove his success, and in doing so, he would provide undeniable public evidence that he had received stolen funds. I verified every single line of code and every routing number. The trap was flawless. There were no loopholes, no technical errors, and absolutely no escape routes. David was bankrupt and facing federal prison. Jamal was walking into a spectacular public humiliation that would end with his arrest. Brenda and Rachel were about to lose their human cash register and their luxurious lifestyles in one devastating blow. I closed the laptop and listened to the motel refrigerator hum. The digital architecture of their destruction was complete. I walked over to the closet, running my hand along the crisp fabric of my navy blue power suit. In just a few hours, the Seattle sun would rise, shattering their grand illusion completely. I was fully prepared for war. Even though I had closed my laptop, my mind was racing with the precision of a ticking clock. I slipped out of bed and turned on the single flickering overhead lamp of the motel room. The digital traps were perfectly set, but a forensic accountant knows that physical evidence is the ultimate weapon in a public confrontation. I walked over to the small wooden desk where I had placed the black leather binders earlier that day. I needed to review every single page one last time to ensure absolute perfection before the sun came up. I opened the first binder, which was entirely dedicated to David's forgery. I flipped through the towering stacks of irrefutable financial evidence. First were the certified bank statements showing the exact moment my $412,000 of retirement funds had been systematically drained. Next were the IP logs I had pulled from the mortgage lender's administrative portal. These logs definitively proved that the forged equity loan application was submitted from the specific router located inside my Seattle home. I had even printed the geolocation data pinning the digital signature to the exact 15-minute window when David and the fake notary were standing in my foyer. The second binder contained the IRS wire fraud reports. Special Agent Carter had officially stamped them with federal seals, and I had paid the 24-hour print shop extra to reproduce them in high-resolution color. I ran my fingers over the crisp paper, feeling the weight of the federal statutes printed at the bottom of each page. These were not just spreadsheets, these were the documented ironclad receipts of their arrogance. I had printed copies of the Tesla lease, the Hermes receipts, and the screenshots of Rachel's social media posts. I had even included a full transcript of Brenda's malicious voicemail complete with timestamp data. Every single lie they had ever told was now bound in black leather ready to be deployed. I closed the binders, stacking them neatly into my heavy leather briefcase. It weighed almost 20 pounds, but it felt incredibly light. It was the weight of my freedom. I turned my attention to the small closet in the corner of the room. I had already steamed my clothes, but I took them out and laid them across the bed, analyzing my armor for the morning. In the corporate world, what you wear during a hostile takeover is just as important as the numbers you bring to the table. I had chosen a tailored navy blue power suit with razor-sharp lapels. It was a suit that commanded immediate authority. Underneath, I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse. My shoes were black leather pumps, designed for confident strides on marble floors. There would be no hesitation in my steps today. I took a long, hot shower, letting the cheap motel water wash away the last remaining traces of the woman who had cried on her bathroom floor just 48 hours ago. When I stepped out, I dried my hair and pulled it back into a sleek, tight bun. There would be no loose ends today, literally or metaphorically. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to highlight the cold, calculating intensity in my eyes. I looked into the spotted bathroom mirror and did not recognize a victim. I saw a senior forensic auditor about to execute a flawless financial demolition. By 6:30 in the morning, I was fully dressed and packing my remaining electronics into my carry-on bag. I wiped down the motel desk, ensuring I left no trace of my makeshift command center. I grabbed the heavy leather briefcase and walked out of room 12, locking the door behind me. The morning air was crisp and cold, biting at my cheeks as I walked to Nancy's silver sedan, which she had graciously allowed me to keep for the weekend. I placed the briefcase on the passenger seat like a VIP guest. I started the engine and merged onto the interstate, heading straight for the downtown financial district. The morning traffic was light, giving me plenty of time to mentally rehearse the sequence of events. Jamal's press conference was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the main ballroom of the Grand Azure Hotel. The hotel was a monument to excess, featuring towering glass walls and imported Italian marble, which made it the perfect backdrop for a fake tech millionaire. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the hotel at 8:15. I found a spot near the elevator bank and turned off the engine. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air condition fill my lungs. This was the calm before the storm. I watched other professionals in expensive suits walk from their cars to the elevators, completely oblivious to the absolute carnage that was about to unfold in the ballroom above them. I checked my watch one last time. 8:20. I grabbed the handle of my briefcase, feeling the cold leather against my palm. I stepped out of the car, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the concrete walls. It was time to introduce them to reality. I walked through the ornate glass doors of the Grand Azur Hotel exactly at 9 o'clock. The lobby was a symphony of wealth with massive crystal chandeliers casting fragmented light over polished marble floors. A large digital sign near the elevator bank proudly announced the event. Next Gen Innovations Capital Launch Press Conference Grand Ballroom. I followed the velvet ropes toward the event space, the heavy leather briefcase pulling down on my shoulder. The closer I got, the louder the ambient noise became. Jamal had really pulled out all the stops to build his final illusion. The double doors to the grand ballroom were propped wide open, guarded by two men in cheap dark suits trying to look like high-end security. I slipped past them, blending in perfectly with the crowd of local business reporters and nervous investors. The room was packed. Over 100 chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a massive stage equipped with a digital projector screen and professional lighting. Waitstaff wove through the aisles carrying trays of champagne and miniature pastries. It was a grotesque display of fake prosperity funded entirely by my stolen equity. I moved toward the side aisle, finding a spot near one of the large marble pillars. From there, I had a perfect unobstructed view of the front row. And there they were. The architects of my intended destruction sitting together in absolute smug satisfaction. David was wearing a custom-tailored gray suit that I recognized immediately. I had paid for it 2 years ago as a promotion gift. Next to him, Brenda looked like a caricature of suburban wealth dripping in gold jewelry and holding a champagne flute with an air of profound superiority. And then there was Rachel. She was sitting on the edge of her seat wearing the diamond tennis bracelet and the expensive white silk blouse I had seen on her live stream. The Hermes bag sat proudly on the empty chair beside her. They were practically vibrating with excitement, completely convinced that they had outsmarted the system. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and an upbeat electronic music track began playing over the sound system. The crowd quieted down as Jamal walked onto the stage. He was wearing a dark turtleneck and a fitted blazer, a ridiculous attempt to mimic the iconic look of successful tech founders. He carried a tablet in one hand and a wireless microphone in the other. He beamed at the audience, soaking in the applause. "Thank you all for being here today," Jamal began, his voice projecting loud and clear across the room. "I know the past few months have been challenging. There have been rumors, there have been doubts. Some of you in this very room lost faith in the vision of next-gen innovations. You sent legal threats. You demanded audits. You thought we were finished." He paused, pacing slowly across the stage, letting the silence build. He was putting on a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. But true visionaries do not quit. Jamal continued, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "We innovate, we pivot, and we secure the future. I called you all here today not to argue but to prove it. I am thrilled to officially announce that as of this morning, Next Gen Innovations has secured a massive new wave of angel capital, $800,000 to be exact." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see the original seed investors sitting a few rows behind my family, exchanging skeptical glances. They had been burned by Jamal before, and they were clearly waiting for the punchline. "I know some of you are still doubting," Jamal said, a smug smile spreading across his face. "You want to see the proof. You want to know the money is real. Well, I believe in total transparency." He tapped the screen of his tablet. The massive digital projector behind him hummed to life. The screen illuminated, displaying the secure login portal for his corporate banking account. He was actually going to do it. He was going to log in live in front of 100 people to flaunt the stolen money. "Let me just type in my credentials." Jamal narrated, his fingers flying across the tablet screen. "And we will pull up the main operating dashboard. Prepare to be amazed." He hit the enter key. The loading icon spun for 2 agonizing seconds. And then the dashboard appeared on the massive screen. Right there in bold green font, the total available balance read $800,000. The room erupted. The skeptical investors gasped, leaning forward in their chairs. Rachel jumped to her feet, clapping wildly, while Brenda cheered loudly. David leaned back, crossing his arms with a look of absolute triumph. Jamal stood center stage, holding his arms out like a conquering hero. They thought they had won. They thought the money was real. They had absolutely no idea that the numbers on that screen were a digital ghost, and the federal trap had just slammed shut. The applause inside the grand ballroom was deafening. Jamal stood center stage, soaking in the adoration of the crowd he had just manipulated. The digital projector behind him blared the bright green $800,000 balance like a neon beacon of his success. Investors who had been scowling just moments before were now nodding in approval, completely blinded by the illusion of wealth. Rachel was practically vibrating in her front row seat, clutching her luxury handbag, while Brenda patted David's knee in a sickening display of maternal pride. They were at the absolute pinnacle of their deceitful mountain. It was time to push them off the edge. I stepped out from behind the massive marble pillar and walked directly into the center aisle. I did not rush. I maintained a steady, measured pace. The sharp click of my black leather pumps against the polished floor cut through the fading applause. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders back and my eyes locked dead ahead. I did not look at the investors or the journalists. I only looked at my husband. David was the first one to see me. He was in the middle of a self-satisfied chuckle, leaning over to whisper something to his mother when his eyes caught my movement. The transformation of his face was a masterpiece of human panic. The smug smile froze before melting off his features entirely. All the color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like a freshly poured wax figure. His jaw literally dropped open. He blinked rapidly as if his brain was violently rejecting the visual information his eyes were receiving. I was supposed to be a penniless woman wandering the streets of Paris crying over deactivated credit cards. Instead, I was walking down the center aisle of the Grand Azur Hotel, looking like a corporate executioner. Brenda noticed his expression and followed his gaze. She let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. Rachel turned next, and her reaction was almost comical. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. On stage, Jamal was still oblivious, continuing to ramble about his visionary business strategy, but the front row of his audience had completely stopped breathing. For a few seconds, David was paralyzed by sheer shock. But then his narcissistic survival instincts kicked in. He realized that if I made it to the stage, his entire world would collapse. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it backward with a loud clatter that drew the attention of the surrounding rows. He decided his only option was to play the victim and control the narrative before I could speak. "Security!" He shouted, his voice cracking slightly with desperation. "We need security in here right now. Remove this woman from the ballroom immediately." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. People began turning in their seats, straining their necks to see the source of the commotion. Two men in cheap dark suits who had been guarding the doors started jogging down the aisle toward me. I did not slow my pace. "That woman is my wife," David yelled, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She is a fraud and a cheater. She abandoned our marriage this weekend and fled the country with another man after draining our joint accounts. She has no right to be here. This is a private corporate event and she is trespassing. Get her out of here before she ruins my brother's presentation." He was projecting his own crimes onto me loudly and aggressively, hoping the sheer volume of his lies would intimidate me into retreating. Brenda immediately joined his chorus of deceit, standing up and glaring at me. "You have some nerve showing your face here, Madeline," she hissed loudly enough for the investors to hear. "You abandoned your husband. You are a disgrace to this family. Turn around and walk out right now." The security guard stepped into the aisle, blocking my path to the stage. "Ma'am," one of them said, holding out his hand. "You need to leave the premises. The event organizers have asked you to step outside." I stopped walking. I was standing less than 10 feet away from my husband. I looked into his eyes and saw the absolute terror hiding just behind his fake outrage. I simply opened my heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up for the security guards to see. It was the federal wire fraud report officially stamped by the Internal Revenue Service. "I am a senior forensic auditor," I said, my voice low, cold, and completely unbothered. "I am conducting an active federal investigation. Now please step aside or face the absolute worst legal consequences available immediately." The security guards took one look at the official federal seal stamped on the document and instantly stepped backward. They were paid $15 an hour to stand by a door not to interfere with a federal investigation. I did not even wait for them to fully clear the path. I pushed past them, my eyes fixed entirely on the small audio-visual control table situated just to the left of the main stage. David was in full-blown panic mode now. He scrambled out from behind his chair, lunging toward me. "Madeline, have you lost your mind?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. You are ruining everything." I completely ignored his existence. I walked straight past him, leaving him grasping at the empty air. The audio-visual technician, a young man wearing a black polo shirt, stared at me with wide eyes as I approached his station. "Step away from the soundboard," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. He raised his hands in surrender and quickly rolled his chair back. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my secondary burner phone. I grabbed the main auxiliary input cable that was feeding the pre-presentation music into the massive ballroom speakers. I plugged the jack directly into my device. On the stage, Jamal finally realized that his grand illusion was collapsing. He dropped his tablet and started running toward the edge of the stage, shouting for someone to cut the power. He was exactly 3 seconds too late. I opened my secure audio files, selected the enhanced recording from my master bathroom, and pressed play. I cranked the master volume slider on the soundboard to its maximum capacity. The upbeat electronic music instantly cut out, replaced by the sharp, unmistakable sound of my mother-in-law laughing. Her voice echoed like thunder through the massive ballroom speakers, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the Italian marble walls. To David, Brenda announced, her recorded voice booming across the room. "Finally taking control of this marriage. I told you from the beginning that cold auditor was no good for you." A collective gasp ripped through the audience of investors and journalists. The room fell into a deathly, horrifying silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Every single person was paralyzed, listening to the raw, unfiltered deceit echoing from the speakers. "It is about time," David Rachel's whiny, entitled voice blasted next. "Do you know how humiliating it is that my brother lives in a mansion while Jamal and I rent a condo? Plus, Jamal really needs this cash infusion by Monday. The investors are threatening to call the federal authorities." Down in the front row, Rachel clamped her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out the sound of her own confession. Jamal froze on the edge of the stage, his face turning an ashen shade of gray. The seed investors, sitting just a few rows back, immediately started pulling out their smartphones, pointing their cameras directly at the stage and hitting record. But the absolute worst was yet to come. I stood calmly by the soundboard, watching my husband. David looked like a man standing on the gallows, waiting for the floor to drop. "For $5,000 cash, I am whatever you want me to be." David, the gravelly voice of Greg, the fake notary, echoed loudly. "Just show me where the wife needs to sign and I will stamp it official. But you better be absolutely sure she is not coming back. If the bank calls her to verify the loan, we are all going to federal prison." "She is not coming back," David's recorded voice sneered, filling the grand ballroom with his profound arrogance. "Her flight to Paris takes off in exactly 40 minutes. As soon as her plane is in the air, I am calling the credit card companies to report her cards stolen. I want her completely stranded when she lands in France." The journalists in the room were typing frantically on their laptops. The local business reporters recognized a massive corporate scandal unfolding right before their eyes. The investors who Jamal had just mocked began standing up from their chairs, their faces twisted in absolute fury. They had just been told that the $800,000 angel investment saving their money was actually the result of a highly illegal forged mortgage scheme. "Done deal," Greg's voice announced, followed by the heavy mechanical thud of the fake notary stamp. "Man, this is a lifesaver," Jamal's voice echoed, cementing his complicity. "When this $800,000 hits my business account on Monday morning, I can finally pay them their dividends and get them off my back." I reached down and paused the audio. The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. It pressed down on the room, suffocating the remaining oxygen. The glamorous facade of the Grand Azure Hotel ballroom had been completely stripped away, leaving nothing but the ugly, undeniable truth of their crimes. I looked at David, who was now hyperventilating, his chest heaving as he backed away from the crowd. Jamal was gripping the microphone stand on the stage, looking like he was going to be physically sick. The audio drop was a flawless execution. I had forced them to broadcast their own confessions to the exact people they were trying to defraud. The audio drop was a flawless execution. I had forced them to broadcast their own confessions to the exact people they were trying to defraud. The heavy silence in the ballroom shattered into absolute chaos. Dozens of investors surged forward from their seats, shouting angrily at the stage. The journalists scrambled toward the front rows, flashing their cameras and holding up digital audio recorders. David was entirely cornered, backed against the edge of the stage with nowhere to run. He looked frantically at his mother, but Brenda was frozen, clutching her gold necklace as if it could shield her from federal prison. But it was Rachel who truly unraveled. She had spent her entire life shielded from consequences, believing her golden child status made her untouchable. The prospect of losing her luxury condo, her designer bags, and her perfectly curated social media life was simply too much for her fragile ego to process. Her face flushed a violent shade of red. She could not accept public defeat from the sister-in-law she had spent years mocking. She pushed past her mother and stomped up the short staircase to the main stage, her designer heels hitting loudly against the wood. Jamal was still gripping the main microphone stand, staring blankly at the angry crowd. Rachel shoved him aside, her acrylic nails digging into the plastic casing of the microphone as she ripped it from his hands. She glared down at me, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. The feedback from the speakers shrieked for a brief second before her shrill voice echoed through the room. "It does not matter what you recorded, Madeline," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are just a jealous, bitter woman who cannot stand to see my husband succeed. So what if David signed your name? You owed us that money anyway. You have been hoarding that massive house while we struggled, and we simply took what was rightfully ours. The bank already approved the paperwork. The $800,000 is already sitting right there in Jamal's account." She gestured wildly toward the massive projector screen where the bright green bank balance was still glowing. "You are too late," she continued, her voice reaching a hysterical pitch. "The money is ours now. You have no credit cards, you have no cash, and you do not even have a house anymore. You are homeless, Madeline. Now get out of my husband's press conference before I have you arrested for trespassing." Rachel stood on the stage, panting heavily, a triumphant sneer plastered across her face. She truly believed she had just delivered a devastating final blow. But as the echo of her screaming faded, the room fell into a different kind of silence. It was the silence of absolute disbelief. Down in the front row, David buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic groan. Jamal stared at his wife as if she had just grown a second head. Even the angriest investors stopped shouting and simply stared at her in shock. Rachel, in her blind panic and arrogant rage, had just committed the ultimate legal suicide. She had stood in front of a room full of defrauded investors, local media reporters, and rolling cameras, and publicly admitted that the recording was entirely authentic. More importantly, she explicitly confirmed that the $800,000 angel investment displayed on the projector was actually the direct result of a forged mortgage application. She had effectively confessed to felony conspiracy, wire fraud, and receiving stolen funds all into a live microphone. She had tied the forged loan directly to Jamal's corporate account, completely destroying any possible defense Jamal might have used about not knowing where the money came from. She had gift-wrapped their guilt and handed it to the federal government with a neat little bow on top. I adjusted my blazer, ensuring I looked perfectly composed before delivering the final strike. I maintained my perfectly calm expression. My lack of reaction seemed to infuriate her even more. She gripped the microphone tighter, waiting for me to break down crying or run out of the room in shame. Instead, I slowly walked up the 3 carpeted steps onto the stage. The security guards did not even try to stop me this time. Jamal instinctively took a step back as I approached. I reached out and calmly pulled the microphone from Rachel's trembling hands. "You are absolutely right, Rachel," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the ballroom. "The $800,000 does appear to be sitting right there in Jamal's corporate operating account. It is a very impressive number. But since you are so eager to talk about banking logistics, let us take a closer look at what that number actually means. Because, as I mentioned earlier, I am a forensic accountant, and you are fundamentally misunderstanding how the federal financial system works." I turned back to the audio-visual technician who was still sitting frozen in his chair. "Hand me the primary HDMI cable," I instructed, holding out my hand. He scrambled to unplug the cord from Jamal's wireless receiver and handed it to me. I plugged it directly into my heavy encrypted laptop. I tapped a few keys, bypassing the hotel network and casting my screen directly onto the massive digital projector behind Jamal. The bright green $800,000 balance that Jamal had been so proudly displaying vanished. In its place, a stark gray and red federal banking interface appeared. Rachel squinted at the screen, her grip on the microphone loosening. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its hysterical edge and dropping into confusion. "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you a free lesson in high-level corporate finance," I replied, turning to face the crowd of investors. When a massive wire transfer is initiated through the federal banking system, it hits the receiving account in two distinct phases. The first phase is the ledger balance. This is the number that shows up on your mobile banking application. It is designed to let you know the funds have arrived. That is the exact number Jamal showed you 5 minutes ago. I pointed a laser pointer at the massive screen circling the top row of data. "But the second phase is called available liquidity," I explained. "And that is where things get incredibly problematic for your husband, Rachel." I clicked a drop-down menu on my dashboard, expanding Jamal's corporate account profile. A flashing red banner appeared across the top of the screen, reading "Federal Escrow Hold Pursuant to Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1343. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the audience. The business journalists were typing frantically, capturing every single word on their screens. "What does that mean?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "It means the $800,000 is a ghost," I said, my voice echoing off the marble walls. "The money physically left the mortgage lender, but it never actually entered Jamal's operational account. It was intercepted by the Internal Revenue Service Fraud Division yesterday afternoon. The funds are currently sitting in a locked federal escrow vault. Jamal has a ledger balance of $800,000, but his actual available liquidity is exactly zero." Jamal snatched his cell phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently. He frantically tapped his screen, opening his mobile banking application. I watched him try to initiate a standard transfer of $10 to his personal checking account. The massive screen behind us, which was mirroring the banking network's backend, registered his attempt in real time. A loud, obnoxious error buzzer sounded from my laptop. On the projector, a massive red box popped up over Jamal's account details. "Transaction declined. Account frozen for suspected wire fraud." Jamal stared at his phone as if it had just caught fire. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, this cannot be right. The money is there. The money is mine." "The money belongs to the federal government as evidence, Jamal," I corrected him, stepping closer to the edge of the stage. "Did you really think you could forge a mortgage document using my premarital asset and just walk away clean? Did you think a senior forensic accountant would just sit in a motel room and let you steal $1 million? I did not just catch you, I built a cage around your entire financial existence and locked the door from the outside." Rachel stumbled backward, the microphone slipping from her hands and bouncing off the carpeted stage with a loud thud. The diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist suddenly looked incredibly heavy. "You are lying," she stammered, her eyes darting between me and the angry crowd of investors. "David, tell them she is lying. Tell them the money is ours." But David could not say a word. He was leaning against the wall near the front row, clutching his chest as if he was having a heart attack. Brenda was frantically fanning herself with a promotional pamphlet, her face pale and covered in a cold sweat. The original seed investors, who had been mocked by Jamal just 20 minutes ago, began advancing toward the stage. Their faces were twisted in absolute rage. Jamal, you promised us a return on our capital, one of the men shouted, pointing a furious finger at him. You told us this was a legitimate venture capital injection. You lied to us to cover up a felony. Jamal raised his hands defensively, backing away from the angry investors. Wait, everyone just calm down, he pleaded, his voice entirely stripped of its former arrogance. This is a misunderstanding. It is a technical error. You cannot fix federal wire fraud, Jamal, I said coldly. And unfortunately for your brother-in-law, the technical errors do not stop here. Because while you have $0, David is about to realize he has significantly less than that. I turned my attention away from Jamal and focused entirely on my husband. David was still leaning heavily against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His custom-tailored gray suit suddenly looked entirely too big for his shrinking posture. I tapped the keyboard of my laptop, switching the projector screen from Jamal's frozen corporate account to a different federal banking document. This new screen displayed the internal underwriting profile for the forged home equity line of credit. Look closely at the screen, David Way instructed, my voice cutting through the rising panic of the ballroom. When you forged my signature to steal my premarital asset, you made a catastrophic structural mistake. You knew the bank would require a secondary guarantor to approve a loan of that magnitude. So you boldly provided your own social security number and your own credit profile to push the paperwork through their automated system. You assumed you would just wash the money through Jamal's company and I would be the only one losing a house. David stared at the massive projector screen, his eyes locking onto his own social security number, which I had partially redacted for public display but was undeniably his. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his pale forehead. But here's the beautiful thing about corporate banking compliance. I continued, taking a slow step toward him. When a primary borrower officially flags a mortgage application for felony forgery, the bank initiates an immediate protective protocol. The system completely severs the fraudulent debt from the targeted collateral. My house is entirely safe. The bank released the lien on my property at exactly 2:15 this morning. Brenda let out a small, pathetic whimper from the front row. What does that mean, David? She asked, her voice trembling with a terrifying realization. What did you do? I will tell you exactly what he did, Brenda, I answered for her. Because the primary signature was proven to be a forgery, the bank automatically shifted the entire weight of the loan onto the verified secondary guarantor. The loan is no longer secured by my real estate. It is an unsecured personal debt legally bolted to David's identity. David gripped his chest, his knees buckling slightly. No, he wheezed, shaking his head. They cannot do that. The money was never spent. The money is frozen. That is the absolute best part. David. I smiled, a cold, ruthless smile that reached all the way to my eyes. The bank does not care that the Internal Revenue Service seized the cash. As far as the lender is concerned, they successfully dispersed the funds based on your fraudulent application. And because those funds were immediately flagged in an active federal money laundering investigation, it triggered a catastrophic default penalty in your lending contract. I clicked a button highlighting the final balance at the bottom of the projected document. You do not just owe them $800,000, David, I announced, the number echoing loudly in the silent room. With the immediate default penalty, the maximum interest acceleration, and the federal fraud fines, you currently owe the bank $940,000. And because the loan is in immediate default, that entire amount is payable today, right now. You are completely bankrupt. The magnitude of the financial ruin hit him like a physical freight train. David collapsed onto his knees, hitting the polished marble floor with a heavy thud. He covered his face with his shaking hands, letting out a sound that was half sob and half scream. The brilliant, manipulative mastermind who had plotted to strand me in Paris with no money was now kneeling on the floor of a luxury hotel, owing nearly $1 million he could never repay. Brenda dropped her expensive champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the floor, spraying expensive alcohol over her designer shoes. She dropped to her knees next to David, grabbing his shoulders. Tell me she is lying. David, she shrieked, her carefully constructed suburban elegance completely dissolving into sheer panic. Tell me you did not ruin us. We cannot pay that amount. I will lose my house. I will lose my pension. You already lost it, Brenda, I reminded her, my voice devoid of any pity. You celebrated his theft. You sat in my house drinking my vintage wine and laughing about me begging on the French pavement. You encouraged him to steal my future. Well, now you get to share his. The original tech investors who had been standing frozen in shock suddenly snapped back to reality. They realized they were not just witnessing a family dispute. They were standing inside a massive federal crime scene involving their stolen seed capital. One of the angry lead investors immediately dialed the local police. The lead investor, a tall, imposing man named Thomas, held his cell phone to his ear with one hand while using his other hand to physically block the small set of stairs leading off the stage. I need police and financial crimes units at the Grand Azure Hotel immediately. Thomas spoke clearly into his phone, his eyes fixed entirely on Jamal. We have a massive wire fraud and corporate embezzlement situation happening right now, and the suspects are attempting to flee. Jamal was not attempting to flee, he was completely paralyzed. The remaining investors who had been sitting in the front rows surged forward, forming an impenetrable human barricade around the stage. These were wealthy, powerful individuals who did not take kindly to being used as pawns in a federal money laundering scheme. A woman in a sharp gray suit slammed her hands onto the edge of the stage, glaring up at Jamal. Her face was flushed with absolute fury. "You told us our seed capital was tied up in overseas research and development," she yelled, her voice shaking with rage. "You sat in my office last month and swore on your life that the delays were due to international supply chain issues, but you were just buying time to steal from your own family to pay us back. You are nothing but a common thief in a cheap blazer." Jamal held his hands up, his palms sweating profusely. "Listen to me, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. I did not know where the money came from. David told me it was a clean loan. He said he had the equity to cover the investment. I had absolutely no idea he forged the application. I am a victim here, too. I stood nearby and let out a short, bitter laugh. "Do not insult their intelligence, Jamal," I said, stepping back to let the investors close in. "You knew exactly where that money came from. I have the audio recording of you celebrating the forgery. You knew David was stealing my premarital asset, and you enthusiastically planned to use it to cover up the fact that you blew their original investments on luxury cars and expensive dinners." Jamal frantically reached for his tablet, trying to close the frozen bank screen, but Thomas lunged forward and snatched the device out of his hands. "You are not deleting anything," Thomas growled, tossing the tablet to another investor. "That is federal evidence now." The mention of the luxury cars snapped the attention of the investors directly to Rachel. She was still standing near the front row, trying to slowly back away toward the side exit. Her Hermes bag was clutched tightly against her chest. Another investor, a heavy-set man, stepped squarely into her path, blocking her escape. "Where do you think you are going?" the man growled, looking her up and down. "That bag you are holding probably cost more than the server infrastructure your husband claimed he was building. You are wearing our stolen money right now." Rachel shrank back, her previous arrogance completely evaporating. She looked around the room, frantically searching for someone to rescue her. She was the golden child, the beloved daughter who had never faced a single consequence in her entire life. But here in this ballroom, her blonde hair and fake tears held absolutely zero power. "I did not do anything," she cried, her voice thin and pathetic. "I am just his wife. I do not know anything about his business." "You literally just screamed into a microphone that the $800,000 was sitting in his account." I reminded her, my voice carrying over the angry murmurs of the crowd. "You confessed in front of 100 witnesses. You cannot play the innocent housewife when you just claimed credit for the heist." Brenda finally found her voice, though it was a weak, trembling shadow of her usual commanding tone. "Leave my daughter alone," Brenda pleaded, taking a step toward the heavy-set investor. She did not know what David was doing. None of us did. A chorus of disgusted groans erupted from the crowd. The journalists in the back of the room were actively typing on their laptops, recording every single meltdown. One of the reporters shouted from the back, "You were on the audio recording too, lady. We all heard you congratulate your son for stealing the house. Brenda recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She looked down at David, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, completely non-responsive. His eyes were glazed over, staring blankly at the shattered crystal of Brenda's dropped champagne glass. He owed $1 million. His marriage was over. His career in sales was entirely finished the moment his face hit the evening news. The pristine image of their superior family dynamics was dead. Thomas, the lead investor, ended his call and slid his phone into his pocket. "The police are on their way," he announced loudly. He turned to the two security guards who were standing nervously near the back of the room. "Lock those heavy double doors right now," Thomas commanded, pointing at the main entrance. "Nobody enters and absolutely nobody leaves this ballroom until the federal authorities get here." The security guards did not hesitate. They grabbed the brass handles of the massive wooden doors and pulled them shut, locking the deadbolts with a loud, definitive click. The illusion of the successful tech bro and the perfect wealthy family was completely shattered, turning the grand ballroom into an upscale holding cell. I stood quietly near the projector screen, watching the rats panic as the ship finally sank beneath the waves. The heavy wooden doors of the grand ballroom remained firmly locked, guarded by the two security personnel who had finally realized the severity of the situation. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumed stale champagne and absolute panic. I stood near the edge of the stage, my posture perfectly straight, holding my heavy leather briefcase. I did not need to say another word. The digital projector screen displaying David's monumental default penalty was doing all the talking for me. Less than 10 minutes after Thomas made his phone call, the heavy doors were pushed open from the outside. A team of 4 plainclothes detectives wearing badges on lanyards around their necks stepped into the ballroom, followed closely by 2 uniformed police officers. The lead detective, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, scanned the chaotic room. "Who called this in the lead?" Detective asked, her voice cutting through the angry murmurs of the crowd. "I did," Thomas said, stepping forward and pointing directly at Jamal and David. These two men just attempted to pass off an $800,000 forged mortgage loan as legitimate venture capital. They committed federal wire fraud, and they just confessed to it in front of 100 witnesses. The detective looked at Thomas and then shifted her gaze to me. She immediately recognized the black leather briefcase and my professional stance. "Are you the forensic accountant who flagged the wire transfer with the Internal Revenue Service?" she asked. "Yes, I am," I replied, stepping forward and opening my briefcase. "My name is Madeline. I have a comprehensive evidence dossier prepared for you. It includes the forged loan application, the digital IP logs proving the application was submitted from my husband's residential network, the bank statements tracking stolen retirement funds, and the audio recording of the conspiracy taking place." I handed her the first black binder. The detective opened it, flipping quickly through the meticulously organized pages. She paused on the IP log data and the federal fraud report. "This is incredibly thorough," she noted, her expression hardening. "Who is the primary suspect for the forgery?" I pointed directly at David, who was still kneeling on the floor. "That is my husband, David," I said. "He forged my signature on the primary borrower line and used his own social security number as the secondary guarantor to push the loan through the automated system." The detective closed the binder and signaled to the 2 uniformed officers. "Gentlemen," the detective instructed, pointing at David, "place that man in custody." The officers moved quickly across the polished marble floor. David did not even try to resist. He was completely broken, staring blankly ahead as the officers pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the silent ballroom sounded like a final, definitive punctuation mark on our marriage. "No," Brenda screamed. The sound tore from her throat, shattering the quiet tension. She lunged forward, grabbing the arm of one of the officers. "You cannot take him. He is a good man. He did not mean to hurt anyone. He was just trying to help his brother." "Ma'am, step back right now or you will be arrested for interfering with an investigation," the officer warned, his voice stern. Brenda ignored him, her eyes wild with desperation. She turned to me, dropping to her knees. Her expensive gold jewelry clinked against the floor. "Madeline, please." She sobbed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Please tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave him permission. He is my son. He cannot go to prison. He will not survive it. I looked down at the woman who had spent 5 years treating me like a disposable asset. I looked at the woman who had laughed at the thought of me begging on the streets of Paris. The same woman who had called me a soulless calculator just 24 hours ago. I did not give him permission, Brenda. I said, my voice ice cold. I gave him enough rope to hang himself, and he tied the knot perfectly. I suggest you call a very expensive defense attorney. The officers pulled David to his feet. He looked at me one last time, his eyes wide with terror and regret. He finally realized that the brilliant, independent woman he had married was not a victim to be exploited, but a force of nature that had completely destroyed him. The officers turned him around and marched him toward the exit. Brenda collapsed onto the floor, wailing hysterically as she watched her golden child being led away in handcuffs. Her perfectly curated suburban life had just evaporated. The facade of wealth superiority and entitlement was entirely gone, replaced by the harsh reality of the criminal justice system. I stood my ground, watching the doors swing shut behind my husband. The first target had been eliminated. Now it was Jamal's turn to face the music. The lead detective turned her sharp gaze away from the closing doors and locked eyes with Jamal, who was still standing rigidly on the stage. She pulled a secondary folder from her jacket. Mr. Jamal Washington, you are the registered owner of Next Gen Innovations, correct? She asked, her tone completely devoid of warmth. We have a federal freeze order on your corporate accounts and a warrant to seize all digital assets related to your suspected money laundering operation. Jamal physically recoiled, as if the detective had pulled a weapon. The confident tech visionary who had strutted across this stage just 30 minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified coward, desperately looking for an escape hatch. And when a coward is backed into a corner, they always turn on their own. It was not my idea, Jamal shouted, his voice cracking as he pointed a shaking finger directly at Rachel. I had nothing to do with the forgery. It was all her family. David came to me with the plan. He said he had access to $1 million and just needed a place to park it. Rachel gasped, taking a step back as if Jamal had physically slapped her. Jamal, what are you doing? She cried, her face twisting in agony. We are a team. We are in this together. We are not a team. Jamal screamed, his panic overriding any lingering affection he might have had for his wife. I am a legitimate businessman. You and your psychotic brother dragged me into this federal mess. You were the one complaining about living in a condo. You were the one demanding a luxury lifestyle while my company was struggling. I only took the money because you threatened to leave me if I did not keep funding your shopping addiction. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the fake empire completely cannibalized itself. The investors who had just been furious with Jamal were now watching him throw his own wife to the wolves with absolute disgust. You are a liar! Rachel shrieked, tears ruining her mascara. You bought that Tesla. You rented the penthouse. You wanted to look like a millionaire for your stupid internet followers. You knew exactly where David got that money. I am filing for divorce today, Jamal announced loudly, turning back to the detectives in a desperate plea for clemency. I am severing all legal ties with this woman and her entire criminal family. I will cooperate fully with the investigation. I will testify against David. Just please do not arrest me. I am a victim of their manipulation. The lead detective simply raised an eyebrow, thoroughly unimpressed by his pathetic display of betrayal. You can explain all of your victimization to the federal prosecutor, she said coldly. But right now you are coming with us for questioning regarding the receipt of stolen federal funds. Read him his rights. 2 more plainclothes officers stepped onto the stage, grabbing Jamal's arms. He did not fight them, but he continued to loudly proclaim his innocence and his hatred for Rachel's family as they marched him down the stairs. Rachel watched him go, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. The man she had just praised as a genius had publicly humiliated her, dumped her, and blamed her for a federal crime, all within the span of 2 minutes. She sank into an empty chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. Down on the floor, Brenda had witnessed the entire collapse. Her son was in handcuffs. Her son-in-law had just abandoned her daughter. Her family was completely and utterly destroyed. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She crawled across the marble floor, closing the distance between us until she was kneeling directly at my feet. "Madeline, please!" She begged, her voice a raspy whisper. "Please, I am begging you. You have made your point. You won. You proved you are smarter than all of us. But please do not do this. You are family. You cannot send my son to prison." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. The woman who had tormented me for years was now groveling on the floor of a luxury hotel, begging for mercy she had never once extended to me. "Withdraw the charges," Brenda pleaded, grabbing the hem of my navy blue skirt. "Call the bank. Tell them you will pay the penalty. You have a high-paying job, Madeline. You can afford it. If you do this, David goes to federal prison. Rachel will be left with nothing. Our entire family will be ruined. Please have a heart." I gently but firmly pulled my skirt out of her grasp, taking a deliberate step back. "I do have a heart, Brenda," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "But as you so accurately pointed out on my voicemail last night, I am also a soulless calculator. And right now the math simply does not work in your favor. Federal wire fraud is not a customer service complaint. I cannot just call the manager and cancel the investigation. The evidence has been submitted, the warrants have been signed, and the federal government is now fully in charge of your family's future." Brenda let out a heartbreaking wail, curling into a ball on the polished floor. The remaining investors began to slowly file out of the ballroom, shaking their heads in disbelief at the absolute wreckage they had just witnessed. The detectives began bagging Jamal's laptop and tablet as evidence. I stood perfectly still, watching the final remnants of their toxic dynasty burn to the ground. There was only one final piece of business left to handle. I looked down at Brenda, who was still rocking back and forth on the cold marble floor, clutching her ruined pearls. She was a broken woman, mourning the sudden brutal death of an empire built entirely on lies and unearned privilege. She looked up at me one last time, her tear-streaked face pleading for a shred of the empathy she had spent 5 years trying to systematically beat out of me. But the well of my compassion was completely dry. I felt no anger, no sorrow, and absolutely no pity for the pathetic figure groveling at my feet. "You stole my future to fund your vanity," I said, my voice steady and utterly resolute, cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. "You sat in my house drinking my wine and laughed while your son plotted to leave me stranded and penniless in a foreign country. You wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial warfare, but you completely forgot who you invited to the table." I adjusted the strap of my heavy leather briefcase, settling it comfortably on my tailored shoulder. "I am an auditor, Brenda. I do not forgive and I do not forget. I just balance the books." I turned my back on her wailing form and walked down the center aisle of the Grand Azur Hotel ballroom. I did not look back at Rachel, who was still sobbing hysterically in the front row, burying her face in her empty hands. I did not look at the detectives securing the crime scene or the investors giving their official statements. I walked out through the heavy wooden doors across the crystal-lit lobby and stepped out into the crisp morning air of downtown Seattle. For the first time in 5 long years, I could finally breathe. Fast forward 6 months. The crisp autumn wind swept through the trees of my backyard, sending a beautiful cascade of orange and gold leaves fluttering onto the wooden patio. The seasonal shift perfectly mirrored the massive transformation my life had undergone. The federal justice system moves with a brutal, terrifying efficiency when handed a perfectly organized evidence dossier. David accepted a sweeping plea deal to avoid a lengthy, drawn-out public trial. He was currently serving a 72-month sentence at a federal correctional institution in California. The $940,000 banking penalty survived his subsequent bankruptcy, filing anchoring him to a lifetime of inescapable financial ruin. Jamal fared no better. The Internal Revenue Service tore his fake tech startup apart, exposing years of wire fraud and brazen investor embezzlement. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and slapped with massive restitution orders. The divorce papers Rachel desperately filed did nothing to shield her from the devastating fallout. Without Jamal's stolen funds and David's hijacked retirement money, the women's lavish lifestyles evaporated literally overnight. Rachel was forced to immediately vacate her luxury penthouse. The bank repossessed the matte black Tesla, and the federal government seized her Hermes bags and custom diamond bracelets as proceeds of a crime. To afford her mounting legal bills and basic rent, she had to take a minimum wage job working the customer service desk at a local discount retail store. It was a highly poetic form of justice, knowing she spent 40 hours a week scanning cheap clothing while wearing a terrible polyester uniform and dealing with angry customers. Brenda lost her sprawling suburban home when the bank foreclosed on the secondary loans she had taken out to magically fund her country club lifestyle. She moved into a cramped, dingy, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely ostracized from the wealthy social circles she once ruled with an iron fist. The family of parasites had finally been scraped off my back. I sat on one of the plush wicker chairs on my back porch, wrapping my hands around a steaming ceramic mug of chamomile tea. The magnificent house my grandfather built stood tall and proud behind me, its legal title completely unencumbered and firmly in my name alone. I had hired a contractor to replace every single lock, upgrade the security system, and entirely remodel the master bathroom, erasing any lingering physical memories of David and his fake notary. The screen door squeaked open, and Nancy stepped out onto the porch, carrying her own mug of tea and a plate of warm homemade scones. She sat down in the chair next to me, letting out a contented sigh as she looked out over the perfectly manicured lawn. "I cannot believe it has already been 6 months," Nancy said, taking a slow sip of her tea. "It feels like a lifetime ago." I smiled, taking a deep, calming breath of the crisp autumn air. "It really does," I agreed. My phone buzzed on the small glass table between us. It was an email from my firm assigning me as the lead investigator on a massive new corporate embezzlement case. I picked up the phone, accepting the assignment with a quick, decisive tap of my finger. I was no longer a victim waiting in the dark. I was the architect of my own absolute peace. The books were perfectly balanced, and my ledger was finally clean.